Hello, and welcome to the Republican Rundown. My name is Tommy Pigott. This week, we're going to be talking about Biden's electric vehicle market manipulation. Now, last week, the Biden administration announced what experts are calling the strictest ever rules on tailpipe emissions. That establishes a de facto electric vehicle mandate on the American people. That means that by 2032, 56 to 67% of new cars sold must be electric vehicles. For perspective, only 8% of new cars sold in 2023 were electric. Now, this mandate would be a disaster for the American people for many reasons, and that's why 2/3 of Americans oppose mandates like these. This market manipulation will hurt the economy, will hurt the environment, will hurt our national security, and will devastate the American auto industry. Even if this mandate goes as planned and this spurs the development of the electric vehicle industry in the United States, it will cost as many as 117,000 jobs in the auto industry. That's if it goes as planned, and Biden has a history of overpromising jobs in the sector. According to the Associated Press, this transition means fewer jobs in the auto industry, and those jobs that remain will be paid less. And that's if this policy goes as planned. That's the definition of terrible policy. But there are many, many reasons to suspect that this policy will have unintended consequences and not even be successful in that narrow definition of the term. The Biden administration spent the first several years promoting electric vehicle companies such as Proterra, and it offers a powerful example of what can go wrong very quickly when it comes to these mandates. Here's Biden promoting Proterra.
Right now we're running way behind China, but you guys are getting us in the game. You guys are getting us in the game. It's going to make a lot of difference. We're going to end up owning the future, I think, if we keep doing what we're doing. When you start making 1,000 buses a year, you're going to need more room for your customers, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
In August of 2023, Proterra declared bankruptcy. Those are the type of broken promises we can expect and have seen many of when it comes to these mandates from the Biden administration. And even those companies that haven't declared bankruptcy, the big automakers, are operating their EV divisions at a loss. We're going to put some of those stats on the screen now. According to the Boston Consulting Group, U.S. automakers lose roughly $6,000 for every $50,000 of EVs they sell. In 2023, Ford's EV division operated at a loss of $4.7 billion. In 2023, GM lost $1.7 billion in its EV division. Last year, Rivian lost $33,000 for every EV truck it sold. As a result, companies must heavily subsidize EVs with profits from gas-powered vehicle sales, increasing the cost of a normal car. Now, one of the many reasons why these companies are operating at a loss is that Americans simply do not want to buy electric vehicles at the scale necessary to make such mandates effective in a market. For one, the cost is outrageously expensive. According to Kelley Blue Book, the average cost of an electric vehicle is $52,000 a year. Families struggling to afford food and rent simply do not have the money to afford such a luxury vehicle. On top of that, Americans have concerns about buying EVs. 2/3 want their next purchase to not be an EV when it comes to buying a car. And on top of that, roughly half of non-Tesla owners would not buy another electric vehicle. This lack of demand has led to layoffs for companies that have already announced transitions to EVs. So we're seeing these job losses already in real time. Here are some powerful examples we're going to put on the screen. Car manufacturers have been laying off thousands of workers, due in large part to falling demand for EVs. In December, GM laid off 1,300 workers in Detroit. And earlier this year, Rivian announced it was laying off 10% of its workforce due to a lack of future demand in EVs. Now, one of the concerns Americans have around EVs extends to the infrastructure around them. One of Biden's main promises was to expand electric vehicle charging stations around the country. That policy would cost $7.5 billion. The absurdity and the extent of this policy is so great, Martha's Vineyard is being classified as low income in order to get money for an electric vehicle charging station. And remember, these vehicles cost $52,000. That's the absurdity of this policy. But on top of that, our current electric system can't sustain the intense and increasing demand from these vehicles. In California, for example, authorities had to tell EV owners not to charge their vehicles during certain times because of the pressure on the electric system. To update our electric system would cost tens of billions of dollars, a price that is magnified by these mandates and the rush to EV through government interference in the market. Now, on top of all that, the strain on our infrastructure, the impact on the economy, these mandates also hurt our national security. They hurt our national security by empowering communist China. Communist China is quickly becoming one of the largest exporters of cars, especially in the EV space, because of their domination of the raw materials needed to produce these electric vehicles. Here's Interior Secretary Deb Haaland admitting that China dominates when it comes to these raw minerals.
By proxy, production, the supply chain of critical minerals that are critical to both the EV world and defense?
Thank you for that information.
Are you aware by multiple studies that in order to satisfy the present requirements of EV and critical minerals to defense, it would take an increase of 2,000% of mining for 20 years? Are you aware of that?
Thank you for the information, Congressman.
Are you also aware that northern Minnesota is home to those critical minerals that are necessary for EV and our Defense Department?
I think there are critical minerals across our country. Yes.
Did you, before you put a moratorium, did you identify and fast-track those sources of critical minerals that you just mentioned?
Are you talking about in Minnesota and the boundary waters?
You had mentioned that there's other places within the United States that also hold critical minerals that are required for the country. Did you identify those, and have you fast-tracked the production or permitting
We are
or identification
in Minnesota particularly.
across our country?
Across
Can
our-
you pick any place that you've identified for an alternative to critical minerals to fast track so we're not vulnerable to China and Russia for our very critical economy, both in defense and EV?
We are working currently on identifying those critical minerals. That is with the U.S. Geological Survey, and of course
But you would identify, and you would agree that not having the critical minerals identified and produced in this country would present a security problem and prevent us from moving ahead on multiple issues, and we're vulnerable to China for very critical components of our economy. Would you agree?
Congressman, I know that energy independence is a priority of President Biden.
China already controls 85% of the processing around these raw minerals needed for electric vehicles. That means that Chinese companies, have a leg up because of that supply chain back to Communist China. And right now, Communist China is looking to infiltrate the U.S. market and destroy the U.S. auto industry. They're already looking at plans to open up plants in Mexico, for example, with the direct effect of trying to target the United States market. Industry leaders are sounding the alarm around this move. Here are a few examples. These industry leaders have said that this move could pretty much demolish most other car companies in the world and could present an extinction-level event for the U.S. auto sector. In addition to the fact that Communist China can produce these cars cheaply because of the access to those raw minerals, by expanding our own market, we become reliant on those raw minerals from China. This has two effects: hurting our national security and our environment. Here's another segment from that earlier clip talking about the impact on the environment of these mandates and relying on Communist China.
So, Madam Secretary, is it your policy that critical minerals should be sourced from countries that are stewards of the environment, like the U.S. and our allies, or sourced from Russia and China that don't share our same values?
Congressman, what I'll say is the President is committed to...
Pretty much a yes and no. It's your policy, madam.
Our policy is to work to make sure we have the best...
I'll take that as a maybe. So are you aware that China produces more emissions than any other country on the planet?
I have probably read that somewhere.
Are you also aware that China produces 90% of the world's plastic from 4 rivers?
I will take that as
You also are aware that China is the biggest offender on illegal fishing?
Thank you, Congressman.
Have you read the Department of Interior report on critical minerals dated December 17?
December 17th of 2021?
2017.
2017. I have not read that full report.
Now, this reliance on China is something that Deb Haaland, again, admitted before Congress directly. Here's a clip of that.
By deductive reasoning, that would mean that electric vehicles and renewables deepen our reliance on China, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So in addition to the threat that this reliance poses to our national security, experts are raising concerns about the software that Communist China can put into these EVs, including the ability to track those in the United States that are using these cars. So to sum up, Biden's policy threatens our economy, it threatens the environment, it threatens our energy sector, and it threatens our national security. This is the type of lose, 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 lose policy that only makes sense in the Biden administration. And it's yet another example of why the American people cannot afford 4 more years of Joe Biden. This has been the Republican Rundown. We'll be back next week.